Good morning. This is Larry Adams, channel FSR Central Illinois. It's been a while since been on here, but today again joined with Matt Bennett. And Matt, looks like the USDA came out with some pretty interesting numbers today that maybe thought might send the market one direction, but it kind of hasn't. So what's some details or what's your thoughts on what you saw today?
Yeah, it's very interesting. Coming into this report, we all assumed that the USDA would have pretty big numbers for us. The weather has suggested, the spring has suggested, last fall has suggested that we've had the makings of a big crop. Obviously, the state of Iowa has missed out on a lot of rains this year. And then, of course, we had this storm run through here this week, which we can talk about a little bit later. But the thing is that this report does not include that storm. This report is as of August 1st, so this year in August, the USDA used a survey-based approach. They did not get out in the field. That's the first year that they have chosen to wait till September to get out in the field. So there is some satellite imagery involved, but it's mostly survey-based. What is the producer telling the USDA my crop is? And so, the producer said, I've got a big corn crop, big bean crop, 181.8. Was the yield, as far as corn's concerned. 180.3, I think, was the average trade guess. My firm was at 183.3. We thought they'd come out with a really big corn crop, so we missed it slightly, but we were one of just a few who were actually above that 181.8. So I feel like, we had the right idea there. As far as soybeans were concerned, most people were too low. I don't even think there was a trade guess at 53.3, but a 53.3 bean crop certainly makes sense. You look at the crop conditions reports, you look at the kind of weather that we've had, you look at the fact that bean crop got planted early, and then you talk to most producers around the Corn Belt and you ask them, what kind of bean crop you looking at? And people don't even want to talk about it because they feel like it's just a really big crop. So yeah, they came out with some big yields. Carryout estimates actually weren't as bad as what we thought they were going to be. I think corn, I want to get this exactly right, so I'm going to look at my notes, but 2.756 billion bushels. Soybeans was at 610 million bushels. And so both of those were a little bit higher than last month, but they weren't as high as what you would think they would be with that yield. The reason for that is the USDA raised exports for both corn and beans, keeping our carryout levels maybe not quite so burdensome.
Yeah, that's as I was going to ask you about the carryouts. So I've been driving around quite a bit the last few weeks. The crops look wonderful. I mean, the old adage is if the roadway is still green, that usually means it's got plenty of moisture in the fields, right? So the water profile in the soil is pretty darn good. I know you said something about Iowa. You've talked to probably some guys out there. Obviously, I feel bad for those guys, honestly. Rough storm this week.
Yeah, and so the thing about the storm that rolled through Iowa, typically when you hear about flattened corn or you hear about a hailstorm or something like that, it certainly is just horrific for those producers. And sometimes you can have a 2 or 3 mile wide swath or even a 5 mile wide swath, and ultimately it just doesn't affect national yield. Okay, this was not that kind of storm. You're talking a 2 or 3 county wide storm, whereas some of these areas had sustained winds of 90 miles an hour. And I don't care. Obviously we're pretty proud of our channel corn. I planted channel corn, and I've had times where my corn was standing, neighbors wasn't, but I didn't have 90 mile an hour winds. So there's a lot of corn flat. A lot of that corn's broke off. People are still trying to assess the damages. It certainly has made national news due to the severity of it. But, Illinois got hit a little bit. Southern Wisconsin got hit a little bit. But no doubt Iowa took the brunt of the blow. Not only did they suffer damages there, I mean, you lost millions of bushels of storage, which is going to have some big basis implications later on in the year. But bottom line, it's a pretty rough deal. How much are we going to lose? I'm going to say at least 250 million bushels is most of the estimates I've seen. That's the least people think we're going to lose. And so it's certainly going to have an impact on corn yield. I would say that 181.8 is going to be a little smaller. The old adage is that big crops get bigger, but I don't know that can happen this year, with what we've seen happen this week.
Yeah, so you're saying some of the big crops get bigger. What's your strategy right now for yourself? What have you kind of been recommending for short term, or even actually talking out into next year?
Okay, so big crops get bigger, I think is going to apply to soybeans. A 53.3 national yield, I'd about bet you money that it's going to be bigger in September. I just think this bean crop is special, you know, and so if I'm a producer sitting in Central Illinois, for instance, you know, and I'm big on the profitability calculator that we put on the channel website. I've got one that I use in my own business, but a typical Illinois producer, 65 bushel yield, you know, like that, if that's their APH, then you say all of a sudden, hey, I think I'm going to have 75 bushel beans. Just that 10 bushel increase lowers your break even in the typical instance about $1 a bushel. Okay, and Larry, you and I both know that 65 bushel APH in Illinois, raising that 10 bushel might be conservative right now.
Yeah, yes, sir.
I've got to think that the big crop is going to get bigger as far as beans are concerned. If I've got a significantly above APH yield, I don't see anything wrong with locking some of that profit margin in. If you want to re-own beans through a call strategy or something that has got a very limited amount of risk, I have no issue with it. But I think taking some of that risk off the table is very wise because you can lock in profit margins. With corn, it's so much more complicated. You can't really lock in much for profit margins unless you're assuming an astronomical yield, given the fact that most of our cash prices are below $3. Yeah, a lot of people are talking about yields 40 bushel above APH. I understand that, but you know, even if you do get 40 bushel above APH, it's really hard to find black ink. And so right now for corn, it's a little more complicated. And I would say producer has to be very cautious as to lock in too much of one side of the equation or other. So if I lock if I sell a whole bunch of corn and then the market rallies, especially if I'm a producer that's maybe thinking I'm even going to get a crop insurance payout, that could really bite you in the rear end. So we have to be very cautious to get too many eggs in one basket. Look at the relationship between, you know, what our yield is and what a potential insurance claim might be, and make sales accordingly, because, or seek some help, because I would say with corn, this is probably the most complicated situation for marketing that I've seen in my career.
Do you see a window coming up here before harvest of any type of movement in the markets that we can capture?
One thing's for certain, seeing the kind of yields that we saw today in the market up has just really surprised me. And so it tells me that maybe there's a little more demand, even pent up, than what the trade has recognized. And so, you know, are we looking for any large scale rally? Boy, that would be tough to come by. But, you know, what are the areas that it could come from? Well, a couple things come to mind. The dollar has been pretty darn weak lately, which has made our exports awfully attractive. And we've seen that that's come to pass out on the market. Another thing that's been interesting is inflation. And so we've seen some inflationary things going on in the metals, for instance. Everyone's seen gold over 2,000 an ounce. Silver got up to $28 an ounce, which, you know, you might not think it's that big a deal until you look 3 weeks ago, it was $18 an ounce. And so there's been some inflation stuff going on, which could spill over to the grains. Do I think that that's something that's going to happen before harvest? Probably not. The only thing that could really boost these markets significantly is, let's say someone comes out and say, hey, we lost $500 million in Iowa, and we feel pretty comfortable saying that because of satellite imagery or whatever it might be. If that was the case, then I've got to think that, you know, you could see a little pop in the corn market. Is it going to be anything large scale? Probably not. And so we need to be knowing what it is we need to get out of this market, not get too greedy, and maybe put some offers out there. If we can catch a little bit of a rally in here, I think it's a good idea to take advantage of it.
I agree. No, I ask this to you. I feel like I ask this every time we're talking. There's guys still out there have some old corn. I mean, and then they're still maybe not working on it or moving on it. What do you do? I mean,
that's a really complicated situation and a tough call. I mean, it's all there is to it. The interesting thing is that some of these locations, some of your end users have actually pushed for corn. And so I want an open dialogue with my end user. I know that one of the larger processors in our part of the world last weekend had about a 10-cent push for people if they could deliver on Saturday and Sunday. If that's something that, you know, that I'm interested in, I darn sure should be. If I'm sitting on a bunch of old corn, I want to at least know about it. And so, you know, the conversations, communication line has to stay open. Look for any possible deals you can possibly get, but be well aware that we're going to be under a squeeze play here pretty soon. We probably have been bailed out of a super early harvest by the fact that temps have moderated a fair amount, and so we probably prolonged getting into the field, another 10 days, maybe to 2 weeks in a lot of places. But bottom line is the market knows, and the end users know corn is coming. They know the beans are coming. They know that they're going to be here soon enough that they can get by for the most part. And so as a producer, I've got to be well aware of that and plan accordingly, because if you play with this for too long, the basis could plummet, especially with the size of crops that we're looking at, especially in my part of the world.
And you hit a nail on the head right there, talking about the cooler conditions we've had. That's just made these corn yields even go up more so in our areas. Yes, it's prolonged harvest. However, you're going to get rewarded for prolonged harvest this year. So any last minute statements to make before we close out, Matt?
Yeah, I would just say have a plan going into harvest. What I mean by that is don't try to make the decision on too many bushels on sell versus store as you go across the scale. That's a tough time to make that decision. If I know $250,000 to pay bills this fall, and let's face it, we all have those bills to pay, then I need to know where those dollars are going to come from and try to have some sort of a plan in place going in. That way I don't get caught off guard.
How can they get a hold of you, Matt?
Yeah, just Chief321 on Twitter is the preferred method. I think that's where most people have gotten a hold of me after these videos the last few times. And I'd certainly be willing to talk to anybody if they want to get a hold of me there. I'd even give them a phone call if they need to dive into this further. Well,
I appreciate your time today. And if you want to get a hold of myself, it's AgAdams99 on Twitter. And again, Matthew Bennett, I appreciate your time today and look forward to seeing you next time.
Absolutely.